What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today is obviously a very exciting day because we are finally able to get our hands on the Battlefield 2042 beta. Now, I was super lucky to actually get hands-on access to the game before the beta went live, and a massive thank you to EA for the opportunity. And so today I thought I'd go through my initial thoughts on the beta after around 3 hours of gameplay, just to give you guys a quick idea of what you can expect when you get stuck into it for yourself. I do have a few quick things to mention before I get into my thoughts, so I will just leave timestamps down below if you want to skip ahead through the pros and cons and all that good stuff, but there are just a few quick things to say before we get into it. Firstly, the gameplay you're seeing is actually on PC but with a controller, and I had these settings turned down to medium simply so that I could avoid running into any issues with lag or anything like that. So graphically it probably doesn't look quite as nice as it would on ultra settings, but unfortunately when I'm recording, my PC can't quite hack those settings. Secondly, I wanted to let you guys know that I am actually going to be live streaming around 90 minutes after this video goes up, so if you do want to see some raw unedited gameplay, then be sure to tune into the stream. That'll be right here on the channel, so be sure to have those notifications on if you are interested in tuning in. Now, I'm going to be breaking this video up into a few different sections, those being the pros, the cons, the fixable issues, and then my overall thoughts so far at the end. So I'm going to pretty much try and cover all of my thoughts here, which again, keep in mind is only coming from 3 hours of gameplay. So this is definitely my initial thoughts and not my overall thoughts on the game or the beta, but I might do a follow-up on this video by the end of the week. So firstly, getting into the pros from the beta so far, and the first one that I wanted to mention was the gunplay. Now, I was pretty skeptical heading into the session simply because we've really not seen all that much gameplay, and when we have, hardly any of it has actually been gunplay, so I was somewhat worried that the gunplay was going to be a bit messy, but boy was I wrong about that. Personally, I absolutely loved the feel of the weapons and the way that they worked in the game, especially considering it is a beta, so they could even be slightly improved by the time the game launches, and considering the gunplay is arguably the main aspect of the game, I was really happy with how it felt. The guns all felt nice and heavy and like they packed a punch, but the time to kill didn't seem too fast or anything like that, and it also just felt kind of like comfortable to play, if that makes sense. Some games can have very clunky and I guess uncomfortable gameplay where you almost feel like you're kind of hoping you can land your shots rather than being in control and sort of knowing you can hit your shots, if that makes sense. I didn't get that feeling at all in my time playing it, and keep in mind I don't think there was actually aim assist on controller, so I was playing on an Xbox controller with no aim assist as far as I know, and still felt like the gunplay was really good, so I'm definitely interested to see how it goes later on my Series X. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the movement. It felt really nice and fluid like it did in Battlefield 5, but not over the top where you can slide 100 meters up a hill, for example. It did just feel slightly more realistic while still feeling nice and fast, and no part of the movement felt clunky or out of date or anything like that. Movement and gunplay are arguably two of the most important aspects of the gameplay, and overall I really enjoyed both of them so far, and I'm curious to see how they play out when the game actually launches too, because no doubt they will be tweaking a few things here and there as well. On top of the gunplay and the movement, I thought the vehicle gameplay felt pretty decent from the small amount that I experienced. Keep in mind, I rarely ever play vehicles in all of the previous games, so I'm not the best to judge it, but it felt nice and smooth to me personally, other than just some, uneven terrain or stuff like that where the vehicles jumped around a little bit, but for the most part I did enjoy the vehicle gameplay, and they all felt pretty balanced as well. Now, two new additions to the game that I absolutely love are the plus system and the vehicle call-in system. I found myself using these multiple times per game, and they really lived up to the hype that I initially had for them, so I was really pleased with those two elements. I did actually struggle a little bit with the controls for the plus system, and so I was actually using my mouse and keyboard to just use it because I could not be bothered wasting my time figuring it out. So I'm keen to see how it works on controller, but the core design of the plus system is amazing in my opinion, and I was really happy with it overall. I also thought that the sound design was really solid as well. The overall aesthetic of the game is absolutely what I wanted heading into the game, so in terms of just the look and the feel of the game so far, it felt really good, and it does feel like a really sort of new version of Battlefield 4 in a way, with the modern setting and the modern UI and all that kind of thing. Overall, for the pros, I thought the core mechanics of the game and the more important elements all felt pretty solid so far. Again, I'm only 3 hours into it as I record this, so I could feel completely different by the end of the beta, but for right now, the elements that I wanted to be good were all really decent for a beta build, so I'm overall pretty happy with those core mechanics of the game. Now, heading into the cons, and keep in mind these are things that aren't related to the beta itself, more the core gameplay elements and stuff like that, as the next section will be touching on issues with the beta build itself, most of which is stuff that really doesn't bother me because it will likely be fixed by launch, but this cons section is definitely stuff that I'm not overly in love with and I'm not sure actually can be fixed right away. The first issue that I had was the map felt pretty large and pretty wide open in a lot of areas, which, considering it is classed as a medium-sized map, does have me a little bit worried that it could end up being Running Simulator 2042. Now, the actual flags on the map were really solid. I thought there were plenty of sections where there's buildings and, you know, lots of nice areas to fight in, but there were a few times that I sort of felt like I had to run way too far, or I had to call in a vehicle and then still spent longer than I'd like driving to the next location. So that was definitely one thing that I wasn't too fond of. There were a few areas, like near the rocket launch pad for example, where I feel like it would do a world of good to just add some more cover and give players an easier way to travel across the map. But that being said, I think it was mostly to do with certain areas of the map rather than the map as a whole, because like I said, some of the areas were really fun, so it's not like it's an issue with the map as an entire map. That said, I'm sure once we all get used to each map, then it will be a lot easier to traverse and know where to go and stuff like that. But yeah, if this map felt large, then I'm slightly worried about how big a map like Breakaway is going to be, but I will cross that bridge when I come to it. Now, the only other fundamental issue that I had with the game was that I was actually a little bit disappointed with the specialist system. I've been pretty excited for it since I learned about it, but unfortunately for me, it did feel as though each specialist was pretty much the exact same, and that no matter who I played, it really didn't change the way that I was playing. I think the fact that you can use any gadget for any specialist is what made it feel that way to me. If certain gadgets were tied to certain specialists, for example, maybe only Falk can use the health crate or only Boris can use the ammo crate, then I think that would definitely make it feel much closer to the typical class system, while also still feeling nice and fresh since they all still have their own specialist abilities. But how it currently is, it did just feel like you pretty much load into the game with a loadout and no specialist at all. It didn't ruin the experience at all. When you think about it, it is no different than Call of Duty, just having regular loadouts, but I think that's one thing that Battlefield has always done well, is having the class system to sort of make you feel important for how you want to play the game, whereas that didn't feel like it was the case with this system. There was one game where I was playing as Falk and I was sort of reviving a few people and healed myself, and then I blew up a moving vehicle with my rocket launcher, and it just kind of felt like I was a jack of all trades, which to me personally feels like the exact opposite of what a specialist system should be. When I think of a specialist, I think of someone who specializes in one specific area and who is essentially the best at doing that specific thing, but honestly I felt like I could have picked any character in the game and done essentially anything that the game had to offer if the opportunity presented itself. So for me, that's definitely one larger issue that I had, which I really hope they do look into and maybe tie certain gadgets to certain specialist classes, but I'll probably make a whole video on that later this week or next just to dive into it a little bit more. Overall though, those were literally the only two issues that I had with the game from a, core mechanic perspective, and sure, they are somewhat large aspects of the game, but I'd hardly say they've ruined the experience for me at all. Just something that I would definitely love to see improved at some point leading into launch, or even after launch if they do take a little bit longer. Now, moving into the next section, and this is just going to be my issues with the game that should be relatively easy to fix, so there's probably quite a few things in here, but none of these are, dire issues or anything like that, and honestly, I'm not even remotely bothered about any of these simply because I feel like they will be fixed really quickly. In terms of bugs, there were definitely a few issues that I ran into throughout my playtime, but from what I can tell, all of them are probably fixable within a week, let alone by the time the game launches, and this part might seem a little bit insignificant, but I am honestly just doing this part mostly so that I can send this through to the developers, so bear with me while I go through some of these bugs and issues. There was one point where I actually had a permanent kill marker on my screen after changing a few settings, and the only way to get rid of it was to redeploy, but it never happened again, so I think it was just to do with changing my ADS field of view or something like that. And so if you guys do run into that issue, then yeah, just redeploy and you should be okay after that. There was one part where I ran to get onto an ATV, and I think I actually pressed a button in this building. As you can see, the door lowering over there on the right, and then because I pressed that button for the rest of that life, Boris was essentially just constantly pressing a button in this weird animation, which didn't really affect the gameplay. Like, I could still do everything that I needed to, but it just looked a little bit odd. So if that does happen to you guys, then I think that should be why that happens. There were also a couple of moments where I noticed a couple of enemies having permanent parachutes after they'd used them, which obviously gave away their position very easily to me, which to be honest I was not complaining about, but obviously that is something that needs to be fixed as well. And again, these are all seemingly pretty small elements of the game that I would imagine will be fixed in a matter of weeks. I also ran into an issue later on in the session where my loadout wasn't actually saving, so I had to use the plus system again to sort of add a scope each time I spawned in. Hardly a game breaking issue, but it was definitely a little bit annoying, and with the weird controls or possibly even bugged plus system on controller, I would have hated that if I didn't have my mouse. I'll show a clip here of what I mean when I say the bug bugged plus system. In my first game, I was doing everything that I could to select what I wanted on controller, but it was seemingly just sort of selecting things at random. So I literally just gave up, and I actually had one hand on the controller to bring up the plus system, and then I actually just used my mouse to select the items instead. Now, I also found there to be way too many AI for my liking. However, I think that was mostly because this was only a select handful of creators playing in this session, so obviously the servers were going to be somewhat empty, and so I'd imagine when I play once the servers are actually live, this won't be an issue. But yeah, I definitely do not enjoy running into more AI than I did people, so hopefully that's not an issue once the game actually launches. As far as I can tell, that was pretty much it though for the issues that I came across in terms of bugs and smaller issues, and like I said, these all seem like they're going to be pretty easily fixable. None of them are like fundamental issues with the game, rather they're just a couple of like visual bugs or whatever the case may be, so I'm not too worried about any of these at all really. And like I said, I mostly just compiled these for the developers to look at, plus I thought it actually might be a little bit handy for you guys to see some of these anyway, since you'll probably run into a few of these yourself. Now that brings me to my overall thoughts so far on the limited time that I've had to play as of recording this, and although most of what I've talked about in the video so far is probably leaning to the negative side of things, I absolutely loved my playtime so far, and I cannot wait to fire up the stream a little while after you're watching this, as I'm just itching to play even more. Like I said, it was definitely not perfect. There are issues related to the beta in terms of those like smaller bugs. There are issues with the fundamentals of the game, like the specialist system, which honestly is more subjective than anything anyway. But in terms of just did I enjoy my time, it was a resounding yes. I think the game has the foundations of a really good Battlefield game. I've been playing Battlefield for over a decade, and I definitely think this game has as much potential, if not more, than any of the games that I've played in the past. It just comes down to how the devs handle it after launch and whether they do implement the feedback from the community. Like I said, the gunplay felt really good in my opinion. The graphics looked great even on medium settings and my potato PC. The movement system felt really nice and fluid, and none of the sort of gameplay related elements felt clunky to me personally, and so overall from a gameplay perspective, I thought it all felt really nice. The new additions of the plus system and the vehicle call-in system felt awesome as well. I instantly felt at home with those, and it didn't take me too long to become accustomed to them. They kind of felt like I'd just been using them forever, if that makes sense, and they did definitely benefit the game as well. And so for me, those are two really solid implementations into the game. I'm not going to give it a rating as of right now, simply because I've only played 3 hours and it is a beta, but I definitely enjoyed it overall despite a couple of issues with the specialist system and the map design and stuff like that. And I'm absolutely keen as hell to get stuck into the actual game once it launches. Like I said, about 90 minutes after this video goes up, I will be streaming the beta right here on the channel, so if you guys do have any questions about the game, or if you just want to come and see some raw gameplay, then be sure to come and check that out, as it should be a lot of fun. I've also got a heap of other content coming this week as well, guys. I'm going to be putting out a quick tips and tricks video just after the stream, and then I've got a heap of other content lined up in the coming days and weeks. So if you guys are new to the channel, then do consider subscribing and turning on those notifications so you don't miss out on any Battlefield 2042 content. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.